and things we're working with. It's kind of a little detailed to figure out how we can communicate that. And what I find is, especially as I travel around teaching, either on the clinical side or the laboratory side, that everybody has a different system, right? If I ask somebody how they take shades, everybody has their way that they do it. Um, I'm not saying their way is right or wrong. I will say that there are definitely challenges across the board, especially when we're all kind of doing something a little bit different to get to the end results. Of course, there's some human particles there that you need to have your own system, but there are some kind of logistics that fall in along the line that we need to discuss and figure out our way through them. So first things first for me is really understanding teeth. And this is where my New York sarcasm is going to come out. I would argue that as clinicians and technicians, we do not understand teeth as well as we should. And what I mean by that is, yes, we work on teeth every day. The doctors are prepping teeth every day. We're building or milling teeth every day. But we've lost a little foundation of really understanding the internal workings, the structures, the angulations, the functionality of each angle and each curve and each oblique ridge and everything that it does. So there's a lot more that happens than just looking at a pretty molar or a nice flat shape or shiny white tooth in the facial. It's kind of really about understanding all the little detailed things that we see here. And I hope as you look at these little details, you say to yourself, man, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot that we're going to have to kind of work through and really talk about to make this work the right way. I will tell you, Jim asked me how my week was. It was an insane week here. We're busy as can be, but also we had just purchased a new milling machine. And for those of you who have been to my office, you know that my teaching center and my milling center is on the second floor. So what a nightmare. We actually had to rent a jack to be able to take away the railings and jack things up, and what a nightmare it was. But in the end, it's installed, and last night I milled my first Zoric. Working on with that down the road that I'll hopefully be showing in Chicago and other coming webinars. Also, I'll mention quickly that we have locked in a date. I'll be out in Cali doing a 2-day, I'm going to call it an intense hands-on, because we're going to cover a lot of topics and a lot of information. We're going to start early and finish late and be prepared for those of you who are coming. I think we're only taking 10 to 12 people. So if you're interested, you can reach out to Jim and find out. I think it's even on the website. I'm not sure yet. But anyway, that's in November, I think the 13th, 14th, or 12th, 13th, somewhere around there. 2 days in Cali. Okay, so when we start to talk about how we communicate color and information and take the actual shades, the challenge really becomes in two aspects to me that I broke it down to. One is the documentation. How are we documenting that information? And to cut to the chase, that is a good quality dental camera. It is not an iPhone. It is not the attachments for the iPhone. It's a good quality dental camera, something with a high megapixel rate. And usually the bodies that we're talking about are full frames that probably run anywhere from $1,000 to $6,000, depending on which one you're going to. That means if you're going with the old SLR or the newer mirrorless. But you can get an amazing SLR today for $1,000, $1,200 that will last you your lifetime. And if you want to go into mirrorless, you're going to pay more for the better bodies today because they're smaller and they're newer. And they're great too. But just like every system, there's pros and cons to each one of them. So the documentation, which I'll kind of run through a little bit with you guys, is one key. The second key is understanding the tooth itself. What are we looking for? What aspects do we want to be able to pick up on? And how do we interpret what we see as we're working our way through it? So for me, let's start with the documentation. For one, photography is king. We will touch on some photography stuff, although this is not a photography lecture. The camera that you use is critical. Again, iPhones are not dental cameras. They're amazing for what they can do, and they're actually great for video, but not for capturing dental color. How you set your cameras is very critical. And I'll touch on a few little setting things just to kind of make it easier for you. The type of flash you use and the positionings of the flash are the most critical aspect to capturing color information, and then also the head and tooth positions that you're working with. I actually use these two background photos on purpose because they look cool and they're funky. The problem is that is never how I want to capture shade information, right? With the head back and angled like that. So really important that we understand that, and I will show you that as we go through our time together. Second part is the understanding. Our understanding of tooth form, the morphology, the shape, the eruption of that tooth, the torsion that happens, how the surface topography affects things, the ins and outs of the ridges, and all of that has an effect on what we see color-wise. Then the basic amounts of opacity, amounts of translucencies, obviously opalescence and fluorescence, and all the things that are inside that tooth. The developmental stages of that tooth and the aging of that tooth, right? So a tooth that we're working on that is on a 22-year-old is fully developed, although not fully matured in its position, meaning that, you know, women are still growing until 25, 26, men 23, 24. So you're still getting some movement and eruption or angulation changes. And if ortho is involved, obviously that puts a whole nother course on us first, right? In the sense that we're putting teeth where we think they belong, and then the braces come off and the teeth kind of move back a little bit and have a little more bounce back to where they thought they were supposed to be. So that does have an effect on how we see the color of the teeth, based on the tooth position, the framing, what's around it, the size of the lip, the angulation of the teeth, and so forth. And then as we age, obviously the tooth itself changes from a structural point of view. A lot of times the enamel becomes a little bit thinner, it demineralizes, a lot more translucencies in the enamel, and then a lot more secondary dentin formations and colors come up. And this is part of nature's plan, right? The enamel is protecting the tooth, the dentin is kind of, and also protecting the dentin, which is very soft. But as we age and that enamel starts to thin, the body senses that thinning and it reforms a secondary dentin, or it helps to strengthen a dentin, and that strengthening kind of gives it a little bit more color in your chromas. So an A1 at 20 and an A1 at 60 are truly both A1s. The only difference is how much more translucency, how much more chroma, or how much more effect do we see. Okay, also the influence around it, the pulpal chamber, how thin is the tooth, how translucent is the tooth. A lot of times laterals look a little lower value. Why? Because they're thinner and the pulpal chamber is closer to the surface with red oxygenated blood. The tissue that supports it, if the tissue color is good, healthy tissue, bio 1 or bio 3, how thick or thin the tissue is, and then obviously the lip architecture, it shadows and frames the tooth. So all those go into understanding what I'm seeing in that tooth. And then obviously last and most important is our space that we're working in and the materials that we choose to use. And I think for those of you who know me know that I get a little frustrated in our profession that a lot of the clinicians teaching and technicians teaching for that matter today are focused on selling you a material, where I don't want you to know a material. I want you to be a viable technician who knows all the materials and understands when, where, and why to use that material based on space that you have, colorations that you're trying to mask or achieve, and then the functional attributes of that particular tooth. So can't be that one material fits everything. It doesn't. And I think we did a webinar a few months ago on metal, right? And I still do metal ceramics, right? It's kind of crazy that as much as we're milling this and layering that and feldspathing this, we still do some metal crowns amongst all the others. So let's look at our documentation. You can see a photo here of a nice central. And if you look at that photo, I want you to notice all the detail that you see in it, meaning that you can see some of the cervical colors here and the influence in the interproximal color. You can see the surface topography. You can see the light reflection kind of in the middle third of the tooth and on that line angle. And then as I go to the incisal edge, you can see all the effects and the translucencies and things that are in there. That's a lot of tooth to kind of work through. So my photography has to be correct to capture that. And again, I will work my way through that. The other part of it is the understanding of what we have to fill. How much space do we have? My mentor Don used to always say to me, which I thought was a great phrase, was the, the doctor or the dentist in this case is the doctor, and they send their prescription to the pharmacist, and the pharmacist has to fulfill the prescription. I used to say something like that, probably a lot more eloquent. But the point of it is our job is to fill the space that the doctor has provided. And to do that, we have to have a vast knowledge of the material options, the information of the space that's there, what the prep shade is, how much space we have, what the final restoration is. So we need to kind of work through all of that information to figure out how do we get all of this out of it. And that's a lot to do in one case. In old school, everything was really about space, right? It was about 1.5 millimeters for almost every restoration. And we were layering those restorations on either metal ceramics or zirconia or now even lithium silicates. And when we did that, we had a very simple system that we would follow. Basically, I'd want to have about 1 millimeter of dentin all the time and 0.2 to 0.5 millimeters of enamel. So it was a very simple system for me to kind of create what I wanted to. Obviously, I used more than one dentin, one enamel, but at least we had a structure. That's really changed today. And it's changed because of minimally invasive prepping, which obviously is better for the health of the tooth, but also because the availability of materials that we're using. So sometimes I'm working in 2/3 of a millimeter, and sometimes I'm working in implant space where I'm working on 4 millimeters. And my job is to figure out how to fill all that space with the appropriate material and still be able to get to a shaded or a shade that looks proper. To do that, your understanding of not only your substructures, metal, zirconia, lithium silicate, but of the powder choices and staining concepts that you're using. I think most of you who know me know I'm still kind of layering guy, although of course I do monolithics. I do feel that I can get the best results with some layering on certain cases. Obviously, on a molar, almost all of them are monolithic at this point, although I still do some layered PFMs for certain cases. Can I make a layered molar look better than a monolithic? I think I can. Are monolithics looking good? Yeah, they are. They're getting good and they're getting better and better, and we're getting better staining materials like with the unique and other materials that are allowing us to actually do more with those posterior teeth on those materials and get more life looking out of them. So that's coming great across the board. But when we start to shift to the anterior tooth, I still want to be applying some ceramic. Now, how much is debatable, and we'll cover this a lot in the 2-day course where we're doing a full layer, a micro layer, and a monolithic crown in the course. So we'll kind of understand the differences and how to work through the materials. But in order for you to be able to understand that, you really have to understand the materials that you're using, right? What is the opacity of the material? How does the light work? How does fluorescence add to it? How does opacity take away or add to what we're trying to create? So understanding a system is really important. And where I get kind of frustrated, and I think we even mentioned this in the last webinar or two, is that as we get more to the micro layering world, we need to be smarter with our material choices and our micro layering. And I would argue we're not. We're kind of spoiled in, building up a crown with 1.5 millimeters and putting opacious dentin and enamel and moving on. And without really understanding how the opacity works or the opacity of each of those materials, when you get to micro layering and now you only have 0.3, 0.5, 0.6, and you have to choose your materials differently to fill that space, I think a lot of people are struggling. So we'll cover that a lot more in the 2-day course, but for today, let's kind of get to the importance. So what am I trying to do? Whatever restoration I'm trying to make, I'm trying to understand how to make it emulate what nature is doing. And to do that, I basically have to manipulate the light first. So that's material. Obviously, we'll talk about how we take the shade, but right now I'm just talking about the material aspect and how we're utilizing our space to pick our materials. The end result is the same. Whether I have 0.3 of a millimeter or 1.5 millimeters, I have to utilize materials to have a light interaction and a light reflection very similar to what nature is doing, especially in single central or 2-unit world or 4-unit or 6 or 8 veneers. Full mouth cases, different argument. I still want them to look real. I still want them to optically work the same. The good news is we're matching each other rather than matching nature. So as long as we've incorporated the naturalness into our ceramics or our micro layers or our monolithic, they will match each other. But not everybody probably makes their living doing full mouth cases every day of the week. There's always singles along the line. And just like everybody else, I struggle with them just as much as everybody else does, trying to get them all perfect. So I'm always looking at transitioning how I see a tooth. And I really see a tooth in three ways. When I look at a tooth, I'm looking at the cervical, which is always the highest in chroma. I'm always looking at the middle third, which is really the brightest part of the tooth, or a better way to say it is the area of the tooth that has the greatest light reflection from it. And then I'm looking at the incisal edge of the tooth. And as I look at the incisal edge, I'm really thinking a few different things. What is the age of the tooth? How much opacity and space do I have or do I need? And what is the final effect I'm trying to create? Is it for a 22-year-old or for a 66-year-old? Because there's a difference in how I'm going to build those structures to accomplish the final result of those teeth. So for me, it's the same all the time. I'm looking at the space and I'm looking at my adjacent tooth. And when I look at this tooth, how do I take that shade? What do I want to do to say, what do I need there? Well, the first thing I'm looking at, different than probably most, because I know when I ask the people what you're doing to take a shade, and I've done courses where I'll say, tell me your shade technique. And everybody's is almost the same. It's very close. One person said, well, I look for value first. I look for opacity first. I look for basic shade first. I say, okay, those are all good things to have. But for me, I always start with translucency. What is the translucency on the tooth that I'm trying to emulate? How much translucency is there? And what type of translucency is there, right? Is it completely transparent, like in an older tooth? Is it more translucent, like in a middle-aged to a younger tooth? Or is it more of a milky kind of enamel, where actually the enamel is whiter and brighter and reflecting a lot of the light from the surface? And the reason I'm starting there is because that's going to give me the information I need to figure out what goes behind the tooth. So starting with value and starting with shade or basic color or with opacity, in my book, is not really the best way to go, because those pieces of information will change based on the type of enamel. Translucent, transparent, or milky are the three basic types of enamel. So why do I say the underlying structure will change? Well, simple. If I have a very milky enamel on the adjacent tooth, then in truth, my enamel is going to reflect a lot of the light from the surface, which means what's behind it is not as critical. As long as I have a dentin, opacious dentin, or materials there that support the value, I'm fine. But if I have a very transparent type enamel, a lot of the light or all the light is going to penetrate right through the enamel and it's going to hit that substructure. And let's pretend it's an older tooth that's very bright. Maybe it's a 1M1-ish older tooth with a lot of translucency on it. Well, the last thing I would do is pick 1M1 dentin, right? Because if I put a 1M dentin on my core and then put a lot of translucency over it, I think you guys all know what happens. My value drops. So that's why I'm never picking what's inside the tooth until I understand what's outside the tooth. And I do the same for almost every case. Now, a case like this, I was able to micro layer, right? So I have a zirconia coping, lingual zirconia. I treated it with a little bit of fluorescent material on the cervical, some mamelons, and a little bit of bluish stain around the incisal edge of the zirconia itself. And then I used 3 or 4 powders, right? A mamelon material, a dentin, an enamel or two. And we can kind of create some nice results with micro layering materials if we're understanding the materials. And that's really the key, is which materials are we using and how are we using them. So for a case like this, which is an older case, I think you guys get the idea. Is it perfect central? Definitely not. Close? Patient accepted it. I probably will never accept it because I always think I can get it a little bit better. So I always joke that when we're working hard on single centrals or congenitally missing laterals, I usually wear the patient down before they wear me down. And they get to the point where they're like, no, it's good. I'm not giving it back to you. You can't touch it anymore. I'm going. That's it. I had enough. So, because I just never feel like it's good enough. I always feel like there's a little bit more I could have done. There's a little more of this that I could have done. And even on a case like this, I'll sit back and I'll reanalyze it. I'll take some easy shade snaps of it, and I'll discuss the easy shade a little bit too for shade taking as I'm doing it later on. I'll shoot it in polarized so I can compare to see if I kind of got all the little details that I wanted to. And I'll really try to evaluate how close I am. Now, this tooth is not cemented in at this moment. It's me trying it in here in the office, but in general, I think we can say everything works. And honestly, you know what works the best? It's not the color, it's the surface. It's the topography and how it reflects light, very similar. Look at the line angle on the number 8 or the 1-1, how it lights up right there with the flash of the photography. And look at the same line angle on the number 9 and how it lights up. And as long as I hit those two things and I have a very similar surface, I'm going to be okay. The rest of it is not going to be as critical down the road because it's kind of what we see. And if I put it under for polarized lighting, you can start to see the flaws, right? You start to see that it's really close in some areas. I think the incisal edge doesn't have to be the same, so that one's fine. The middle third value is really pretty close, but I dropped it a little bit here on the chroma at the cervical. I'm a little low in value, a little high in chroma there. Maybe I'm even a hair low in value in that mid third, but again, it works fine what we see from a facial point of view. And not to shift topics, part of the lecture series I'm working on for next year has a lot to do with that. So we will cover some of that in the course, but a lot of it is going to be about us understanding how teeth look in the face and not how teeth look like this, like you're seeing them on the screen. I think this is a big flaw that we're starting to fall into in our profession about the fact that we can zoom in and look at every detail, but we're missing the big detail. The big detail is how we see teeth in the face. So something I'm kind of working on for next year. The other aspects when I'm looking at nature and trying to capture that shade information is I also want to be conscious of the gingival architecture. I want to understand where the root form is and how the root form kind of pushes that tissue out and kind of creates colorations on the tissue, but also how that tissue, being bio 1, bio 2, bio 3, tends to hang over that tooth a little bit and can actually shadow what you see in that cervical third. If you really look at that cervical third, I'm going to kind of move this up so you can kind of get the point I'm trying to make. You see how you see that pinkish hue? That's just the gingival pink kind of shadowing over the tooth. I have to be aware of that when I'm building with my materials, because I have to make sure I put the right materials there, that when the pink comes shadow it, that it has a similar effect to it. It doesn't look too low in value, or it doesn't reflect light too much. So I'm consciously trying to be very aware of the gingival architecture as I'm taking my shades. The other thing that I'm looking for is the positioning of the tooth. So if you look at the laterals in this particular case, if I was having to build a lateral on this case, probably the patient would want us to bring that lateral out. But let's ignore that for a moment. Notice how the central, because of the slight overlap, shadows this lateral. See, if I actually looked at that lateral from an oblique angle, the coloration would probably look much more similar, although laterals do tend to be slightly lower in value in general. But if you look at it from an oblique angle, you'd probably see a much similar color. Because I'm getting shadowing from the central, I'm losing value. So would that affect how I built it? No. My job was still to build what I see in the tooth, then let nature do what it does. I don't want to kind of try to beat nature. I want nature to do what it does. All I want to do is make sure that I'm incorporating as much of the natural essence into the buildup or into the information that I'm taking for it to work for me. So, and one more thing there. Also, interproximal depth. And this is another thing that's kind of critical in shade taking that we overlook a little bit. So if you look into proximal, you can see that there's warmth and there's color there. Another huge mistake we're making with some of these white bright restorations that we're doing is we're not putting enough color and enough warmth in the teeth. And I get it. There's probably 6 doctors in the audience right now screaming at the screen saying, my patients don't want that white. My patients don't want that color. They want white. They want this. They want that. I get they do. But um, I think it's part of our job to educate them on what looks right in their face. And maybe showing them teeth in this size is not the best way to show it. Because when you show teeth with depth like this, of course you see colors and translucencies and interproximal depth. When you show them teeth in the face, they look good in the face. And that's really what we're trying to kind of accomplish. So too much information, and I'm guilty of giving too much information with a lot of my patients, but I need to incorporate all that information to make that work. So material wise, I've played this game before. You guys can take a look at all these teeth here, and you could say to yourself, or I would ask you, what would you build if I had to match this tooth as a single central? What material would you use, and how would you use it? Would this be layered, micro-layered, monolithic? Would you stain? What would be your choice to achieve what you see here? And look what you see here. Here's that reddish kind of a hue that I talked about before. Here's in that middle third of the tooth. Look how it starts to brighten up a little bit, but yet you see translucency and opacity. And then as I start to get towards the incisal, and let me be clear, the incisal edge isn't just this little spot here. Look at what happens as I come to the middle third of the tooth, and all of a sudden, right in the center, you're already starting to see some of that translucency kick in. And then off to the mesial and distal corners, you're seeing more of that translucency kick in. So I have to be very cognizant of where each of these different materials need to be. So I'm not sure how you would build this one, but what if I threw you a loop and said, okay, what about this one? What material? What system are you going to use? Micro-layer, fully layer, monolithic? And would you treat it exactly the same as how you built those two? But do notice the characteristic. Gingival coloration, brightness in the middle third, translucency. What about this guy? How you building that one? What material? Monolithic, micro, pick one, right? And every one that I do, I'd like you to kind of start to think, what do I need to achieve that? How do I actually emulate what I see there as I work my way through it, right? And each one of these is different challenge. Now, the game that I've played before over the years is which one of these is real and which one of them are fake. Some of you probably know already, and there's obviously one that stands out as very fake, and that's this one right here. In fairness to why this one looks fake, because I was matching an adjacent tooth that was fake. So I was redoing a crown that someone did a long time ago and it broke, and I had to match what they already had. And yeah, that one pops out as kind of fake. The rest of them, can you tell real or fake, real or fake, real or fake, real or fake, and real or fake? Can you tell which ones are which? So play along at home. Jim's giving out toaster ovens if you get them all right. So nature or artistry and which is which. Hopefully I fooled you on a few of them. I will tell you that the one all the way to your left is real, that is real, that is fake, that is real, that is fake, and that is fake, right? So each one of them have pros and cons that are good and bad, but the point I'm making is we have to figure out what information we're seeing to be able to replicate that with the materials and the options that we have across the board. And it's even more challenging in single central world. So this is probably where Jim's concept of, you know, what do we need to take that shade properly comes up. So let's take a look at this. Look at a natural tooth. And I think a lot of you could probably guess at what you see already on this tooth, right? Meaning that you already see that there's warmth and chroma here and some translucency. You do see the more brightness in this area, but there is color underneath. And by the way, this is a very milky enamel. This is not the most translucent of enamel. You know that because you don't see tons of translucency here. It's there. You can kind of see it, but that milky enamel is kind of covering it a little bit, and the surface topography is covering it. The other reason I have this photo here is because I want you to look at an adjacent to it. This is not the same case, obviously, but this was just a digital model. And when you look at this digital model, I want you to look at the digital lines and printing and compare that to what I see in nature. What's the point I'm making? Something I said before. I'm not using digital models for single centrals or veneer cases. They're getting better and better, and they're getting closer to emulate the little details. But for me at this point still, Physical impressions for single centrals, 2 units, or all veneer cases were kind of standard for me in the laboratory. Okay, so let's look at the coloration here and have an understanding of what we're actually looking at. So for one, first things first, all the coloration of your tooth really comes from the inside. And this is why I fight against some of the monolithics, because to truly achieve what nature does, we need to have a certain amount of opacity, fluorescence, and opalescence on the inside of the tooth. And you can't get that on a monolithic crown because you're putting everything to the outside. Doesn't mean they're bad. They're getting better and better, and I do them too. But I still want you to understand the ultimate way to do that. And not to sound business philosophical right now, but what I've been saying for probably 10 years, and I'll say for the next 10 years or five, see how much longer, um, the the ability to understand the internal aspect and understand when, where, and why to layer, micro layer, and use stainings is what separates you from the pack. And I was having a good conversation with a friend of mine yesterday about milling and designers. And this is going to sound insulting to some people, so you guys can kick me later on. But he said to me, there are digital designers and there are technicians. He said they both don't necessarily work well together. And the point that he was trying to make is today, we've kind of pushed everybody coming into our profession into being digital, and we haven't given them enough foundation to understand morphology and shape and coloration. Doesn't mean there are not great digital providers out there. There are. And there are people I like to learn lots from and are way better than I will ever be with shape and morphology. But in general, we've lost a lot of sight because we're so digital prone, and we're letting the computer do so much things for us that we're losing the ability to understand something as simple as maybe I could have made a monolithic crown and only cut back the cervical third and layered a little pink translucent on there, and I would have hit that mark a billion times better. What will separate you 5 years ago and 5 years from today is your knowledge of when, where, and why to do that. So we're digital. I'm 3 mils upstairs, right? Just got my newest, but I'm still layering and putting ceramic on almost all my cases. And I'm knocking on wood, but I am probably 6 weeks behind with work at this moment. So busy, right? So I know a lot of the monolithic labs tell me how much they're struggling, and they're struggling because if you have a library, a milling machine, and stains, so does the other guy. And now it's just about a matter of your knowledge and what changes and separates you from the pack. So, okay, no more philosophy. Let me go back one. So my dentin color is kind of where I get the most from. I get the color, I get the opacity. It also creates the lobes and the mamelon, and it also gives me fluorescence. And that's all from the internal aspect. Once I started adding enamel to my tooth, and this is why I picked the enamel first when I'm picking my shades, because the enamel is going to give me the basic shape of the tooth. It's going to show me where the surface topography. It's going to filter the dentin, meaning that I'm either going to allow light to get to the dentin or not get to the dentin. And also in the enamels is where we kind of create that opalescence, and we create that halo or surrounding effect that we're looking to encase our tooth with a more light reflective type material. So I do think of them very differently. And this is why when you get into monolithic world, you don't really have the ability to do both of those, although the stains are getting better and better, and the materials are getting better and better. But when I get back to micro layering, I am getting, or fully layering, I am getting the ability for light to interact into the tooth more. And if I can interact into the tooth more, I can get more light into the root of the tooth and into the tissue of the tooth, and that's where the harmony blends better. So I'm really trying to do mostly everything in the anterior for me is micro layering. Even if I'm doing lithium to silicate veneers, I'm layering them. I'm not leaving them as monolithics. And I would encourage people to do a lot more of that and be better with that, because that's what really separates you from the pack. So let's look at this color. And you can see here that if I look at it from just a straight line point of view, let me move that out of the way. How would you pick this shade? I mean, look at this just from this one point of view. Look at that pinkish hue. Look at that kind of brightness, but yet it's covered in translucency. And look at as I get to the age and I get more translucency and this kind of secondary dentin mamelonish kind of a feel happening to it. So I need to be able to read all those things. And I've already said to you that as I look at this tooth, I can tell it's kind of a milkier enamel, the brighter enamel, even though I see the translucency underneath there. I will bet $1 million that one of the questions that will come up later on is, how do you know if it's milky enamel or if it's bleaching, right? You can tell, believe it or not. You can usually tell by the way the light reflects from the surface. This is not a bleached tooth. This is actually a natural tooth. If it was bleachy, I would be losing more of this translucency, and I would probably be losing a little bit more of this color. And it does kind of change the surface a little bit from the light reflection point of view. So you could definitely see the difference in the two. Okay, so my goal is to match a tooth that's like this. Very challenging, since not only is there a lot of detail and a lot of effects that are happening here, and now we're working on an implant, so I have to deal with the implant angulation and everything else. And my goal is to replicate what I see in these colorations into this same area right here. I can't really do that out of the bottle. I know everybody wants to take one dentin or one enamel or 2 or 3 stains and paint them on and make that work. I would tell you that doesn't really work well for the dentistry that I'm attempting to do most of the time. A lot of times I'm mixing a powder or two here or there. Sometimes maybe I'm adding a dot of pink or salmon-y stain into my dentins to kind of get a brighter dentin, but yet warm them up a little bit with a little bit more of a natural feel to them. And most of the time I'm kind of mixing 1, 2, or 3 powders as I'm doing that to really get myself to a point where I can capture what I need in the amount of space that I have and still make it look as natural as possible for the rest of the restoration. So if you take a look at the final restoration, I think you can see that I've kind of hit most of these areas pretty well. Is it perfect? No, definitely not, but it was pretty close. I got to actually slide this one in myself and kind of make sure that I was putting enough pressure on the tissue, which is really my goal. The surgeon did a fabulous job giving us some extra tissue here, and I wanted to make sure I was putting enough pressure to push that up a little bit further and support the tissue. Okay, taking my shades. There's a billion different shade guides out there for you guys to use. Personally, I'm not a fan of many of them. I tend to stick more to the 3D linear guide is kind of my favorite one. I still use the classics here and there, but I tend to stick more to the 3D linear. And the reason I'm doing that is because I'm looking for these 3 things. I'm looking for the chroma, I'm looking for the value, and I'm looking for the age effect. First, what is the translucency? That will affect how much opacity I need behind it. And as I'm building, most of you know my canvas concept that I've been teaching for 15, 20 years now. And this is based off of exactly this. I designed this based on what I saw in nature. How do I get chroma? How do I get value? How do I affect the age of the tooth? The other thing that kind of came out with this over the years is as you work on form, my canvas system makes a lot more sense. So let me explain to you what I mean. When I look at a tooth from the zones that we just talked about, right? That would be the chroma, the value, and the age. Well, look at a tooth from a sagittal point of view. And if you notice how they kind of correlate to each other in the planes, the chroma zone kind of angles in towards the tissue, which what? Creates shadow from the tissue and gives us that little hue of extra color that the tissue is providing for us. So it makes sense that we have the most chroma here. The middle third is where we have the most value. Well, look at the position of the middle third. Look at where it is in relationship to the rest of the tooth. It's out there. So you get the most light reflection, of course, the most value from it. And then as I look at the incisal edge, about the age. The angulation changes. I need to have more or less translucency depending. So I'm kind of using that as my reference. And I want everybody to remember that the shade guides are not final shades. I sarcastically said in a dozen lectures over the years, if the doctor ever finds a shade that matches the A1 pin perfectly, I'll do their work for free for the rest of their life. And the reason I'm confident in saying that is because there is no such thing as a shade guide that matches a tooth perfectly or a tooth that matches a shade guide perfectly. It does not exist. A shade guide is nothing more than a reference point for us. And the reference point is about translucency, values, and chromas. Those are the real things it gives us for references. As I look through teeth, a lot of times I can't just look at a tooth and say it's A1 or A2 And I've always joked over the years that when doctors don't know the teeth color, they give up after a while, and I just say D3 because D3 is like the end all. I don't know what it is. It's D3, but that's kind of the end all color. In dental color, I don't want to go too far into this, but I'm just going to tell you that in the basic world of dental color, which is this little tiny football shaped thing you see over here, I'll blow it up for you. These are where the colors that we use in our standard dental system are. You have A's and B's that actually fit into color of nature for dental, for teeth. The C and D's do not. And when you make C and D shades in a factory, we're putting greens and blacks and weird colors in to drop their value down. Also, the B1 does not necessarily fit into dental color. It's also the #1 remade shade in the country for several reasons, but mostly because maintaining the color of the B1 through several firings doesn't work well, and two, because the B1 just falls outside of the natural color zone for teeth. It doesn't mean you can't have brighter teeth, it just means the colorations of the B1 is kind of a bad shade across the board. So remember, the shade tabs are really references for us. What I want you to do is start looking at your teeth differently. How do you look at the cervical first? What is the cervical giving me? How much translucency do I have there? How much color support do I need behind it? Second, what is my value going to be? How much translucency do I have there? What kind of a material do I need behind it to support the brightness that I see? And then the third part is the age. How much translucency, how many mamelons, what's the angulation, how much of a halo, all the little effects that we kind of want out. So I'm breaking it down into those 3 zones all the time. And also sometimes, obviously, when you have rotations, that throws you for a little bit more of a curve because of the shadowing on the rotations. Okay, the gingival architecture is also important. If I was to make a central on the #9 here or the 2-1, the chances of it matching this tooth perfectly are slim to none. And by the way, these are 2 natural teeth. The reason this one looks a little darker isn't just because it is darker, it's really because of the tissue being so much shorter. And because the tissue is kind of falling on it, this tends to look a little wider and a little lower in value. How do I fix it? I'd have to kind of really adjust to look at this or raise the tissue level. So I have the proper ratio of size to width to make the tooth match itself better. Okay, I told you that I'm using the linear guide. I don't use the classic that much. It's okay if you use it. I like the linear system. The reason I like the linear system better is because the shade guides have a little bit more essence of nature to them. And let me explain to you what I mean about that. If you look at the old classic guide system, and almost all shade guides are kind of made the same way, they're made on a sliding scale of chroma to translucency. So what do I mean by that? I have, let's pretend this is an A1. I have chroma. I have less chroma, less chroma, less chroma, translucency, translucency, translucency. That's kind of the way the shade guide is made. I told you that teeth aren't made that way. Teeth are really about chroma, value, and translucency. So technically, these guides do not represent nature at all, and I would need 2 or 3 guides to give me this example. On the lumen, on the 3D guide, I'm sorry, you do get a little bit more of what I'm showing here, especially with the 1M1 pen. If you look at the 1M1 pen, you can actually see that there's a brightness in the center, more warmth in the cervical third, and a little more translucency. So I do think the 3D guide kind of falls a little bit better into the spectrum, but it's still just a representation. It's still just something to give me some information to work my way through. Years ago, we talked a lot about 18% gray, how that's forgiving to the eyes, and why I want to use that. And the reason I'm pointing it out today is because if you're taking a shade, one of the mistakes you make is you're staring at the teeth so much. Or for doctors, they've been prepping the teeth for 4 hours, and now they took an impression, and now they're going to give you a shade, right? Which is the worst time to take a shade, obviously. Should be done pre-treatment before the patient's anesthetized, all the important things I think most of you guys know already. But the purpose of having 18% gray, which is what you see on the base of the 3D guide, is that if you drop your eyes down to the gray, it relaxes the retina and kind of rejuvenates it. So you have the ability to kind of look down, relax the eyes, and then come back up and start to look at the shading again, which is really the point, was the importance of the 18% gray, okay? So Again, I'm kind of 3D guide, and how I hold the shade tabs to the patient's incisal edge are very critical for me. I'll show you that in a better photograph in a second. I used to have an 18% grade card next to them. I don't need it, honestly. I barely ever use it because I already have it here. I also used to use that for calibration of photos, which I haven't done in 15 years, so you don't really need to do that. For those of you unfamiliar how the 3D guide works, let me kind of give you a quick overview. Basic setup is the first guide that you have, which is all the M's, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, basically middle of the road kind of values, is what we're going to use to determine the basic value of the tooth. Now, I already said to you, I picked translucency first. So as I'm looking second for my value, in my brain, I'm already thinking I have a lot of translucency or a lot of milkiness, but I still need to find out what the basic value is of the tooth. Once I have the basic value, let's pretend it's a 2M. I'm going to go down to my 2 guide, and on the 2 guide, I'm going to say, okay, 2M is kind of what I see as the basic value. Now my question is that value a little brighter than I think it is on the 2M, or is it a little bit more lower value that I think I see on the 2M? And I have the ability to adjust that, meaning that I can go to L. L technically means light, but realistically for ceramics, it's yellow. It adds a little yellow hue, which gives you a little more light reflection. And R really stands for red, or red value, which means when I add red into ceramics, my value drops. So basically, anytime I go to the L's, I'm getting a little brighter. Anytime I go to the R's, I'm getting a little bit warmer. And again, I'm using all this information to kind of grab onto that information of what I see in nature. Then I'm shooting or photographing that. I prefer edge to edge, the edge of the shade guide to the edge of the essential. It has to be in the same plane. That is the key. You can't put the shade guide in the dentulous area, on top of the tooth, next to the tooth, by the gum line. No. The eye sees colors best in vertical lines, and I want my incisal edge even to the incisal edge of the tooth. And then I want the flat of the camera to be flat to the tooth and the incisal edge. So everything is in the same plane for me. As far as using toys and tools, I love them all, and I use lots of different ones. This is a favorite of mine. I probably use it different than VITA would teach you. I think VITA is teaching this to you to take a shade with it, and there's your shade, right? And you can compare your restoration. I could shoot that at the end and see if I've gotten something similar. I kind of don't do that. I do check the restoration at the end sometimes, but what I'm actually doing is I'm going through all the legwork that I just showed you, looking at the tooth, translucency, value, chroma, age, picking my shade guides, taking my photographs. And when I'm all done and I feel like I've made my determination of what I want it to be, that's when I break out Easy Shade. And then I take my tooth shot and I compare. And if on my screen I came up with 1M1 with a, A3-ish chroma on the cervical, then I feel good. And now I look at what the screen is giving me, and if it gives me A1, 1M1, or if I shoot it in 2 different places and it gives me an A2 or A3, I know I've done the right job. If it gives me something in left field, much different than I picked, I'm going back and reevaluating my choice, because the machines don't have my retina. They work mechanically, and they see things that we don't always catch right away. Could be having a bad day, or eyes could be fatigued. Men, you fatigue quickly with color. Women are a little bit better. So in truth, I want the reference point more than anything else. And when I see a similar choice that I made, I feel confident that I made the right choice. I also use the OptiShade, working with it more and more. It's great. There's a lot of goods and bads to everything. It's really sticks around single central world. But no, a nice toy. I kind of like it more for some of the teaching aspects of it, in the sense that I can kind of look through the RGBs and the colors and figure out what I'm seeing. But where I really kind of like it is when I'm teaching ceramics, a lot of times I'm talking about formulations, right? That you might need to add a dot of salmon to that, or maybe you want to bump up the value by throwing in a little bit of a bleaching dentin into your regular dentin, right? So I'm making formulas sometimes But what I kind of like about the Opti Shade is that's what it does. It kind of gives you the formula that myself and a lot of people have been kind of using for a lot of years. So it does kind of make it nice, although it's complicated, right? Because you're mixing a dot of this, a dot of that, a dot of this. But is it cool? Yes. If you're doing a lot of single centrals, probably the best way to go. Okay, photography. Um, no dental photos in the chair. Really important for me that we kind of keep the photos out of the dental chair. Patients should be sitting or standing because I want the camera angle not to be coming up or from the side of the patient. I want that camera angle to be flush to the facial of the tooth all the time. When your patient lays back in the chair, no matter how long your arms are, that's the shade you take. And look at the difference between those two shades. Patient laying down, patient sitting up against the wall. You're telling me those two teeth look exactly the same to you? They don't. So really important that you don't do that. Patients are sitting and they should not be anesthetized. It should be done before. A few little tricks here, and I don't want to spend too much time because we're getting close to the end here. A few little things with the camera that you should be aware of. You can't treat what you don't see. So the camera gives you tons of information. I use it for everything from treatment planning to monitoring the progress to legal documentation. You can use it for so many different things. But again, I wanted you to be able to look at a tooth and see the things that I'm seeing the pink, seeing the bright, seeing that mammillary structure, the translucency, and then thinking, boy, that's a pretty transparent enamel that I need. So if I thought this was 1M1, maybe I got to use a bleaching dent in here because I'm going to have a lot of translucency over it. I want you to think differently when you're picking through your teeth and through your shades, okay? I think most of you know, this is my sequence of photographs, headshot, dental facial, and dental up close. All my doctors take this sequence first before we start any cases. This is our diagnostic evaluation of our cases. And when I'm taking my color documentation, I'm only using dual flashes. That's a 45-degree angle into the light, into the face or into the mouth. I do work on manual for almost everything I do. I want my f-stop at f32 or higher all the time. I don't need a higher speed than 125. And the only time I'm moving those side flashes in is if I'm taking surgical shots. Doctor's doing crown lengthening. I want to look at the bone. I want to try to get a posterior shot and I need more light back there. But anything color oriented, flashes are 45-degree out to the side. And this is for surgical, that's something different. So why is that important? Because of how the light represents when I shoot the light from different angles. When I shoot with the flashes close, I'm getting all the light in the center. When I come from the side, I'm getting light from the sides, and that allows me to kind of get the proper look. Here's what I mean by the two of these. You see the two side flashes. You'll notice I have shadowing. You're always going to get that there. But look at the coloration of the anterior six. I move these lights in, I can see those molars great, and if that's what you're trying to shoot, then this is the way to do it. But if I'm talking about color, look what happened to my teeth. Look where the light reflects, and look how I've lost the ability to see the color on those teeth. So I want to make sure that you're always using an angulated flash with your system. Okay, let's try to finish up here. Oh, I'm not sure that I have this in twice. I might have put it in twice by mistake. Sorry about that. Okay, so in a case like this, real challenging case, I'm going to look at what I just said, milky, translucent, and transparent. Which one do I have there? Oh, let's look at her teeth. Very transparent, right? She's got very transparent teeth. So it's going to be a real challenge for me to kind of hit that. Also a ton of surface topography and a lot of detail going on there. So this, to make it worse, it's an implant. So I got to kind of figure out how to manage that in all the space. This is not the way you want to take the shade. Doctor, put the shade tab in between the teeth. Don't do that. Edge to edge on the adjacent tooth. Never fill the space or on top or next. You create shadow. I want more edge to edge here, just like you see there. The implant is in. I'm not going to walk you through all this. This was kind of complicated of how we did it, the abutment. I've shown this in other lectures. I'm really just showing this for the shade at this point. I wanted to make sure, this is why I put it in. I wanted to make sure that my coloration of ceramic supported the gingival tissue and gave the gingival a similar color or a similar look to what I did. So I did a try-in. It was a little bit off. I came back and did some tweaks. I had to refabricate part of the abutment, and then I kind of reworked it through a little bit. And there's the final result. And you can see a lot of translucency on here. And the goal was to try to emulate it as best as we can in this single lateral kind of world, how hard that is. So remember, my enamel is a filter. Whatever I do with my enamel, either white, milky, or translucent, I'm kind of emulating back to the ceramic. My friend Adam made this years ago, and it's one of the greatest examples of filtration. You'll see the colored pencils. I'm going to put a few different layers of translucency on it. So here is normal translucency, normal enamel, 2/10, 4/10, 6/10, and 8/10. And you notice what happens is the thicker it gets, the grayer it gets. If I change that to a whitish enamel, the thicker it gets, the whiter it gets. That would be the difference between a very translucent enamel and a milky enamel. And kudos to Adam Leshko, who came up with that idea to show that. It was really a great way to show it. So what am I doing? I'm building my teeth, and in the end, I'm trying to figure out how do I cover them or filter them with translucency so that when I merge those two, I have what looks natural. I think this is the Lenny Colburn case, and I think he might be there. So Lenny, this might be one of your cases from a long, long time ago. Okay, I'm just about out of time here, so I don't want to kind of spend more in case you guys have some questions, but in the end, I think you get the idea. Is when I'm taking my shades, the goal of it is really to kind of understand the translucency, the effect of the enamel, what coloration I'm going to need to kind of make that work, make it blend and harmonize with the rest of the teeth, and then follow that through in my dentin building, my enamel building, and everything else that I'm doing. So case like this, I'm following all the steps that I just said to you. This is a refractory case. I'm going to use opacious materials, some fluorescent materials, and I'm doing that to do what? Create chroma, create value, and create the age effect, just like I'm seeing in nature across the board. And I won't bore you with the build-ups because this is not really a build-up lecture. This is really just about how I'm seeing the color and transferring the color. But in the end, once I have my base color in, now I'm going to filter that out, just like I saw when I looked at the two. Milky, translucent, transparent type of enamel. I want to make sure I'm still following chroma value and transition, meaning that maybe I'm adding more chroma in my translucency, maybe I'm adding more value in this translucency, and maybe I'm adding more transparency in this translucency to allow all the effects that I'm trying to achieve to work for me. Okay, so we'll finish that up. I filtered it up, and I think you get the idea. It's all about the light reflection. I'm just going to skip through these last three slides. And final case before. Insert. Look how nice the tissue looks as that veneer slides in, right? I love that when I see that. Final veneers, patient still numb here, so I never got final photos of after her being numb, but you get the idea, right? We incorporate all the things that we talked about, and that's my basic system. So I'm going to stop here because I think I'm just about out of time. I'm late for a change. Sorry, Jim. But I'll stop here and say, guys.
No problem. I think we were having some technical issues as well, so not to worry. So I'm going to go ahead and close us out with a few more words, and we'll do some Q&A. And let me get here. All right, so those of you that are working with needing CE, we're going to go ahead and process those here in the next few days, and we'll get those letter or emails for the CE to you. The workshop, the webinar has been recorded. We're going to take a couple days. We'll edit it. If we have any issues with the technical side, we'll see what those, clean those up, and then we'll go ahead and post that on our VITA North America YouTube channel. And then if you need to get a hold of any of our reps, VITA reps, there is a list that you can view as well on the copied video recording. We do have some more webinars scheduled to close out 2025 along with Peter. So you can see there 28th, we're going to talk about pressing. The 18th of November, December of 18th, ceramics, topography. Peter mentioned during this webinar about topography, how important it was. So please join us December 18th. Peter's going to go over that. And then Peter also mentioned about the November 14th, 15th workshop. It's a 2-day workshop here in Brea, California at our new facility. So if you're interested, please give us a call here at the marketing in VITA North America, and we'll get you signed up. And then we're working also with the 2026 schedule that will soon be out shortly. Peter's always gracious enough to provide his information, contact information. So if you do need to contact Peter directly, please do so. Please make sure, though, that you give him some time to respond, because he is working all over the place. He's lecturing all over the world, day in and day out. Sometimes you can probably get a hold of him better at 2 in the morning than 9 in the morning, but don't call him at 2 in the morning, please. I'm just joking. So let's look at a couple of questions that we have, Peter. So when the shade is selected for the prescription, is it the exact shade you want the dentist to provide you, or do you want them to give you maybe a brighter shade?
Yeah, so most of my dentists do not really choose the shade. They usually just take quality photographs, right? So we've kind of got to a system where they might give me a reference point. They might say, photos are in Dropbox and 2M1 seem closest in my office. And that's a good reference point. But then I'm using the photography, the reference points of the shade guides that are in the photos to kind of determine. And if I'm ever confused, and sometimes I am, I might say, you know, you told me the 2M1 looked the closest. I'm looking at your photo and the shade tab doesn't seem to be close. Why? What were you seeing? And then, you know, it can be a little bit of a dialogue. But you'll see if you were in my lab that most of my scripts do not have shades on them. Most of them say photos are in Dropbox or transmitted.
The other one is, and you talked about the translucency, transparency difference and the importance of that. The question is, looking at the translucency, transparency, what do you look at in deciding what material to work with? So if you have a high translucent shade or a transparent shade, do you move away from zirconia and go to more silicate or something other, or it all depends?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because, you know, it's hard to go into, and I think we'll maybe cover that more on one of the other webinars if I haven't in the past. But a simple answer is that I'm trying to choose the material based on a few things. One, what is the enamel like to start with that I have to match next to? How much space do I have to fill? And what is behind it prep shade wise? Those are kind of the three determinants that I'm really looking for. And those determinants have many variables, right? Because what's behind it could be a metal abutment. What's behind it could be a really black prep shade, a stump shade. And that might determine me saying, you know what, no matter what I do here, zirconia or lithium silicate, I'm never going to be able to mask that very well. So how would I want to treat that? Maybe I want the doctor to go back, prep off 2/10 more, and actually opaque the tooth with this a whitish cement or a colored cement, and then reimpression. This way I have a better color to work from. Maybe I want them to internal bleach. Maybe I want to go PFM because I want to get the finished material to cover the tooth and then have the most space to build. So I wish I could tell you it's a simple system. The simplest is translucency, space, and color to work from, but then there's a billion variants after that.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so you had also talked about the interproximal shading, in a sense, or, you know, the central and then shadowing that lateral and so forth. So the question was, for those shadow shading or a little bit more chroma, do you do that, try to do that internally with forces, or do you use stain, external stains?
You know, it's funny. I build a lot of color inside. I'm a little more old school that way, and I like my stains inside. I like my materials chosen inside. And I can tell you, it's funny when I work with newer doctors. Sometimes they say, oh, there's a little too much chroma here. Can you take it off? I'm like, no, I have to grind it off and rebuild the tooth. Probably I've gotten lazy over the years, and maybe I do a little more staining in the interproximal these days, so I can remove it if I wanted to. The interproximal staining is not as bad as the facial staining, right? Because the interproximal staining is not distracting the light as much. So I don't mind if you're adding the color that way. I tend to build it in, to be honest with you. But if you're going to stain, I'd rather you were staining there, not on facial.
All right, and another question that several had was a patient walks into my lab for a custom shade. Since they're not dentists and have visits in a clinical operatory, the patient's teeth dry, wet, inside, outside, controlled. So a little bit of everything, right? Question.
Yes, I think a few things. Let me be clear and say that it is illegal for technicians to take shades on patients in probably over half the states in the country. So be aware of that. Legally, you're not allowed to see a patient, sit them down, put your fingers in their mouth, and take shades. A dentist is supposed to be present. Some states you are legally allowed. Be aware of that, although I'm sure we're all taking shades. I didn't say that out loud, did I? Second thing is, you don't want patients coming from the doctor's offices because usually they are anesthetized and they've been laying back in a chair for 3 hours, and you don't know if it takes them 5 minutes to rehydrate or 4 hours. So you don't want them coming in from the doctor's offices. And then when they are in your office, you're taking the shade, please have a clean environment. I have everything in sealed sterilization bags. I have retractors, I have gloves, I have all the things that you should have. So you look like you're in a neat, clean environment and the patient feels comfortable. As far as actually taking the pictures, because my patients are not coming from the doctor's office, they are hydrated fine. I will take my headshots and then I move in closer and closer and start taking the close-ups. And then I retract them closer to the end when I want to put the shade tabs in, because even retracting some patients can start to have them dry out. So I want the mouth to be as moist and normal as possible. And I want to kind of utilize my shade taking time efficiently. So this way I'm not letting them dry out.
All right, another question on denture tooth with shade. Have you tried adjusting the facial thickness of a denture tooth to alter its color for a partial denture case?
So yes, I have, but I mean the simpler version of that is coloration. I actually alter almost all the denture teeth I use for a lot of different reasons. I'm trying to, shape-wise and texture-wise and all those things. I actually like, and I'll plug in for VITA here. I like our staining system that's made for acrylics and composites, and I love having like an all-on case that's done in denture teeth, where I actually sandblast the whole case lightly and then colorize the teeth and then glaze over them. So I feel like it puts the artistry back in me having control of it. Plus, it's different than what other people are used to seeing. So I have the ability, and I do that on a lot of the cases that I work with for Toronto type bridges.
All right, and just to throw in a milky surface look, the question, you do that all in mainly in the porcelain internally to get that scattered look of a milky enamel look, or stain.
Yeah, I think, I'm not sure if they're asking it the right way or not reading. I think what they're saying is when you have striations of whites and things, am I putting those in the stain? The answer is yes, most of the time. Sometimes inside and then putting a little transparent enamel over it. But if it's just a milky look that I'm looking for, then I'm just doing that with a whiter, brighter enamel.
All right. Well, Peter, that's it for the questions from everyone. So I appreciate you spending the time again, going over shade and, going through all those intricate parts. And again, like I mentioned earlier, we kind of take for granted and think there's nothing more than just put the tab up and select a shade, right? Yeah. And there's so much more to that. So thank you for going through that entire process. So anything you'd like to share with the customers that are attending?
No, thank you. I'm excited about some of the new lecture materials I'm working on for next year and for Chicago. Really excited for the hands-on, so I hope to see you there. I look forward to see you, Jim. I haven't seen you face-to-face in a while, so really nice to see you. And looking forward to November, so hope to see you guys in Cali.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Hope you had a great time. Again, you can always visit our VITA North America YouTube channel to see all the webinars, today's webinar, and others that Peter's done in the past. So please do that at your convenience. And we will see you next time on another VITA Academy webinar. Thank you, Peter, and thank you, everyone else. This will conclude today's webinar.